There you go. This has worked for us so far. So yeah, I find it relatively easy. So. All right. Well, if more people join, I will let them in as we go. I'll put this somewhere where I can see it. Cool. All right. So, welcome to the January meeting of the Developer User Group. We're going to do a presentation today on Apex Trigger Maturity, ways to measure your engineering capabilities. Mitch Spano will be presenting for us. And the people here, these are our user group leaders, myself, Melissa Shook. We have Nadina Lisbon. So I'm gonna let everyone say hi. So Nadina, say hi.
Hey, can y'all hear me okay?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, I'm Nadina Lisbon. I work as a Salesforce technical architect for TradeShift, and I'm glad everyone's here.
Totally. And we have Justin Lisbon.
Hey everybody, I'm a Salesforce technical architect at Turnkey Vacation Rentals, and it's glad to see everybody.
And then we have Lindsay Fivecoat.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Fivecoat, and I am a senior architect at Silicon Labs here in Austin.
Awesome, thank you. And I forgot, I'm a senior Salesforce administrator at a company called Easy Texting here in Austin. Well, we actually don't have a location anymore because we're now fully remote. So, yeah. So, oops, wrong one. There we go. Meeting expectations. So we're just going to kind of go over our baseline for our meetings. We expect everyone to treat each other with respect. This is a safe place for everyone in the Salesforce Ohana. So just getting that out there. Sure y'all know that already, but it's a good thing to remind people of. All right, and I am sorry that I went too far. And now I have to remember how to go back. Wait, about arrows. Yes, thank you, God. Okay, so announcements. February meeting, we have Mitch coming back to back presentations for us. So in February, we're going to talk about partition your trigger logic using metadata. And I love that because metadata is one of those things that I feel like is underused, and I think it's going to be really cool once we to learn how to use it more for those of us who are interested. So great. And we would also like to make sure to invite everyone here to fill out our Google form. And I bet Nadina will do a copy and paste for us into the chat, so you can easily click on that and click on that Google form, just answer a few questions. You have anything you want to present on, you know, this is a really great, like, hate to say it, but safe space to learn how to present. Like, we're not, you know, we're just your average local user group, you know, and presenting here can help you get those skills to be able to present better at bigger events and eventually in person when we can never be in person again. So even if you have something that's only 15 minutes of content, we might be able to get a few of them and put them together, and just, you know, it doesn't have to be the whole, oh, we're trying to play around with different things. So we obviously we need you because we can't present ourselves every time. I mean, we won't, quite frankly. So so that's for our call for speakers. And then a couple more announcements. The local in Austin want to make sure we let you know that the nonprofit user group has a meeting tomorrow. You can sign up to listen to Terry Cole, who is a Salesforce MVP, talk about technical debt. And that is that topic is good for everybody, right? It's not just about nonprofits, like technical debt and how to, you know, solve that and how to manage that as you go. I mean, we could all probably use it. I know I could. So that would be a really good one if you have the time to be. It's like lunchtime for us. I mean, you know, if you can do it, totally join. Also, we want to let you know that there's 20% off all expert-led developer sessions. If you use the code DEV20, you'll get 20% off all developer sessions on Trailhead Academy now through the 31st of this month. So it's running out soon. So if you are thinking about doing it, go buy it now. And last but not least, Dream TX, which is wrong because anyway, we have what is ours called? Why am I forgetting what ours is called?
Texas Dreamin'.
Thank you, Texas Dreamin'. So this Dream TX like has us all confused here in Texas because we're like, wait, is that another Texas conference? No. Anyway, so that's the developer track is now available on demand. At that, there's a link that Nadina just provided you in the chat. So awesome. Thank you, Nadina. All right. And I'm gonna do that. Okay, cool. Am I showing you the chat by mistake or not? No, I'm not.
No, you're good.
All right. So I would like to now introduce Mitch Spano. Mitch is currently an application engineer at Google, and he has over 7 years of experience developing solutions on Salesforce.com. His experience includes application development, architectural design, test planning, and execution. He currently holds 16 active Salesforce certifications. See, this is what I'm talking about, including application and system architect. So yeah, he's one of those people that make me have to like get back to work. So Mitch, I'm going to stop sharing and let you take it away.
Awesome. Well, thank you for
Oh, and wait, sorry. One more thing. You stay to the end. That's when we're going to be giving out our certifications. So, but you got to be here to win. Okay. Thank you. Go ahead.
Awesome. Awesome. Let me share my screen. Cannot share. Let's try again. There we go. All right. And let me know when it is visible to everybody else.
Yes.
All right. Cool. Well, thank you all for the introduction. Like Melissa said, my name is Mitch Spano. I am an application engineer at Google. I am pretty brand new to Austin too. I moved here right after the pandemic started to get this job at Google. So I moved across the country just to work remotely. So I'm new in Austin, but I'm really excited to share some of this information with you all and get your feedback and just be a part of this Salesforce community. So what we're going to be talking about today are things about Apex trigger maturity. So this can be like multiple different topics. We're just going to keep this pretty light. If you're a new developer, or if you're a strong admin, or if you're a manager, like this is the right place. You found yourself in the right place. This is not going to be too technically complex, but it should arm you with the skills necessary to take a look inside your org and say, hey, wait, this is good, or no, this is bad. This is immature. We should redo this. Okay. So just in case I happen to say anything that's forward looking, make sure you make your purchasing decisions based on what's currently available. I have a sneaking suspicion that none of us are really actually the ones making purchasing decisions. We're probably just building the stuff, but just in case, okay? So a little bit about me, like I said, Mitch Spano, engineer at Google, started my Salesforce career in 2013. You can find me on Twitter at Mitch Spano. I'm not as active as some folks in the community, but it's definitely a good place to connect if you have questions. So that's enough about me. Let's learn about you. Like I just kind of said, this talk is intended for folks who are system administrators, maybe junior level developers, maybe even senior level developers. It's always great to go back to the fundamentals. If you're a consultant, or if you're even a manager and you've never built anything technical, you're still in the right place. You need to be at least a little bit familiar with Apex, like in order to understand the context of this discussion. It's great if you've attempted to write a trigger. If you've attempted to write a trigger at some point in time, a lot of this stuff is going to make a lot of sense. But if you're a manager or a leader or something, and you want to, like I said, be able to go in and see, is this good or is this bad? The point of this discussion is to arm you with those tools necessary to determine what's a mature trigger and what's an immature trigger. So some things that we're going to be discussing today include like the basics and the fundamentals of triggers themselves. What are the moving parts? How do they operate? How do you write one? We'll be talking about the benefits of using a trigger framework, and then we'll examine code samples at multiple different levels, increasing in maturity and expertise. Some things that we're not going to be discussing today, we're not going to be discussing any of the declarative parts of the platform, really. We're not going to be discussing workflows. We're not going to be discussing process builders or flows. We will very briefly touch on unit testing, but most of this is all about the structure of your trigger. So what is an Apex trigger? So an Apex trigger is something that happens in Salesforce. Think about it as a snippet of functionality that happens whenever records are inserted, updated, deleted, or undeleted. Now, this will always happen. The code that you write that belongs in a trigger will always happen, no matter what. No matter, all records that get inserted will have their insert triggers be ran. So it's very important because it applies to every single record in your org. Another thing to think about is an Apex trigger is very similar to an Apex class, but an Apex trigger provides you that injection point. So an Apex trigger can call stuff which is defined in a class, but not the other way around. You can't call something that's defined in a trigger in a separate class. So how do triggers work, right? So when you send a request to Salesforce, either via the user interface, maybe via data loader, maybe via some API for a connected application, that record is going to land in Salesforce, or maybe you have multiple records. And what's going to happen is it's going to be chunked out into groups of 200 records at a time. In case you're using like the bulk API, you could have 10,000 records in your transaction. The trigger is going to process 200 of them at a time. Triggers are defined on a given S object, right? So you could have a trigger on account. You could have a trigger on contact. You could have a trigger on opportunity, right? And then we have some variables at our disposal when we're constructing our triggers or defining them that'll help us specify which logic we want to implement. So the triggers which hold the records that we care about, or excuse me, the variables which hold the records that we care about are trigger.new, trigger.old, trigger.newMap, and trigger.oldMap. And we'll get into what those mean in just a moment. And they can operate in one of these 7 contexts, which are listed here on the screen, before and after of insert, update, delete, and undelete. It doesn't make sense. You can't do before, undelete. You can't, I believe that is the only one that does not have a both before and after context. So this is kind of the anatomy of an Apex trigger, right? You have the name of the trigger itself, which S object it's defined on, and which context you want it to execute in. So if we wanted to create a sample trigger on account, right? This trigger is called the account trigger. It's on the account S object. It operates before the insert context, and all that it does is it prints out hello world. So this is, kind of the very beginner place that you're going to learn and start actually authoring your Apex triggers. So going back to that, we had the new trigger.new, trigger.old, trigger.newMap, and trigger.oldMap. These are what hold the records that are being processed in the transaction themselves. So we'll start out with trigger.new and trigger.old. These are just lists of records. So a list can have multiple elements, right? So here we've got all of these accounts, or they kind of look like accounts, right? We got Acme Corporation, Globex, Initech, Gas Company, and they all are just in line. This should be very similar and look very similar to folks if you've ever executed a SQL query. So a SQL query will return to you a list of records. So if we wrote a SQL query, we can say, I have a list of accounts that's defined by this query. And then we can loop over all of the elements that are in our list. So for an account called my account, that's an element of accounts, we're going to print out the account's name. This is a pretty simple data structure. And like I said, if you've ever executed a SQL query, this is what's returned to you. So if you're in Developer Console, you see all those lists of records. That's what a list is. Nothing too complex. The next one, though, if we take a look back at what all of our variables are, we have new map and old map. So lists are fairly straightforward data structures. Maps are a little bit more complicated. I like to think of a map as a dictionary. So in the dictionary, I can look up the word hello and it gives me a definition, right? We think about a map as having a key and a value, kind of like your word in the dictionary and what its definition is in the dictionary. So in this case, our key would be the ID that I have right here, and the value is this whole record for Acme Corporation. So we can add new elements to our dictionary or our map by saying, hey, this is the key that points to this value. So what does this look like when we're actually, how do we actually interact with a map data structure within Apex? So this is kind of what it looks like. Instead of just having your list of elements, you have your set of keys, and then each key points to a value. So if you wanted to do this based on that query, based on what was returned via a query, then you could do something like this. So I'm going to create a map of an ID to an account record based on what is returned from this query. And then I can say, get me the definition of this account ID. And that will return to you the value that's associated to that key in the map. Now, what does all this have to do with triggers? Why are we talking about queries and stuff like that? The query is just meant to be an example, something that you might be familiar with. But what we care about when we're talking about a trigger is really like old and new, right? So you have that trigger.old map and the trigger.new map, right? In this case, you have two separate maps. Think about it, two separate dictionaries. Each one of them contain the same word, as in the record ID. Here's the old version of it, and here's the new version. It's the same ID, but it points to an account record. And we'll see on the old version, the phone number began with 512, and on the new version, it's 733. So we can then deduce based on what's stored in our old map and our new map that the phone number has been updated in this transaction. I'm going to pause here for a little bit. Or do we have any questions about lists and maps and records? Because these are very foundational and important topics in the authoring of a trigger. So I'm just curious if anybody happens to have any questions about this.
Mitch, about the old map versus the new map, obviously in the new map, the one thing that has changed is the phone number, but are you looking at the collection of data, the old map, all of the data, or in saying that there's a difference with the new map? Can you clarify old map and new map with only one field is different? How should I be looking at that?
Yeah, that's a great question and a great point, actually. If I had modified also the website, then the new map would point to the account record with a newly populated website as well. So there would be two separate differences. So this old map, basically think about it as this. You can take the ID of the record, and if you give that ID to the old map, it'll give you the previous values before the transaction started. If you take that ID and you give it to the new map, it'll give you the new values that have been proposed to the record. So if I changed an opportunity status, or excuse me, an opportunity stage and its name, the old map would point to the old values of stage and name, and then the new map would have the new values in the opportunity that is pointed to from the ID.
Great, thank you.
Yep. Any other questions about maps and lists? And this is like the computer sciencey data part of the discussion. We'll get into actually like the real code in just a moment, but these are very foundational and important topics. So if you have a question, please let me know. And if you think of a question, add them in the chat, and then we can take a look at them as time goes on. You might have some questions that come up as we're going through this.
Hey, Mitch. Oh, sorry, Josh.
Yeah. I was going to ask if you could go over again a little bit about, why and when you use a map instead of a list in code.
Yeah, so a map and a list are almost the exact same thing. The fact is that you can use the key of the ID, the record ID, will tie the old version to the new version. If you'd like to, I do have some code that'll go into that we'll discuss in this discussion. And I do have a scratch org all spun up. So maybe we can do some live coding and we can really get to the bottom of this old map versus new map with some live demos. We can get to that in a moment. So that might be helpful.
Hey, Mitch. Yeah, so just a quick question. So in terms of maps versus lists, so I was watching this developer like mock interview, and in the person said that in most situations, you always want to use a map because it's obviously you don't have to traverse the whole thing since it has like unique value pairs. But is there like anything in terms of like governor limits? Like if I was traversing through like a massive list instead of using a map, would I like run into anything like that?
That's a great question. Actually, I believe that a map, a list can contain 10,000 elements, and also a map can contain 10,000 keys. So fundamentally, they should be no difference. If you have a map that is constructed out of the same list of objects, there's really no difference in traversing the key set of your map or iterating over all of the values in your list. So
Okay.
you won't. It might have some negligible performance considerations, but you won't hit a governor limit because you choose to use one as opposed to the other.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Cool. I'm going to move forward, and we'll talk about maps. Like I said, we're getting to live code demo in just a moment here. But the final part of like the fundamental moving parts of an Apex trigger is the before or the after context, right? So if you take a look back, I'm going to scroll back, so forgive me as I go through all this stuff. Right here in this example account trigger, we say this happens before insert. What do we mean when we say before insert? And I always like to think about it like you're arriving at a train station and the train is leaving, right? You can either hop on the train right away, or you could wait for the train to perform its full loop and then come back and pick you up. So think about it like this. In the before context, that is like we're jumping on the train right away. And we get the ability to modify the record before it hits the database. So for example, I'm going to go back over here and I'll go into one of these triggers, which we're about to go into. But right here, for all of the accounts before insert, I'm going to set the account's name to bar. And this means that when I insert the account, I don't need to insert the account, wait for it to hit the database, and then update its name to bar. I just do it all in one insert instead of an insert and then followed by an update. So like think about it, you jumping on the train before it goes to the station. Otherwise, you need to wait for the train to come back around. That is that secondary update for you. So if you're ever modifying something that is like on the exact same record that induced the trigger, you probably want to do it in before context. All right. So if there's anything to take from this slide or from this presentation, it is this slide. There are 3 basic rules when it comes to writing a trigger. Number 1, always bulkify your code. You cannot assume that there will only be one record that is going through this transaction. Okay, you always need to handle the case where somebody uses the bulk API and sends you 10,000 records. You need to write your code such that it can handle it. Number 2 is always pick one trigger per S object. And we'll get into that in just a little bit. But that is a very fundamental, well-documented best practice about writing triggers in Salesforce. And the third one is pick a framework and stick to it. Frameworks are there to help you, and they're there to make it so that way when you want to implement new functionality, you don't need to worry about a lot of the hard thought is actually taken care of for you. So we'll get into what a trigger framework is in just a moment. In fact, that's the next slide. So what is a trigger framework, right? A trigger framework is a way for you to take your injection point of your trigger and appropriately route your logic such that you have consistent control over your order of execution and you have one place to go to when you need to implement new functionality. You don't need to modify it in multiple different places. So we will jump in with writing our first trigger. So this is level 1, right? So if this is the first time you've ever written a trigger, you might do something like this. And this is actually the example we just saw. So I might create a trigger called trigger foo on account. And before the account gets sent to the database, the trigger will set the name to foo. But then let's say Melissa's also on my team, and 2 weeks later, we get a new requirement that says, you know what, we're going to change the name. We're going to also set the name to bar, right? So we write a new trigger that says, okay, for all the accounts, set the name to bar. Now, what happens when we try to test this trigger, right? So if I am in an Apex test, I want to mock up an account, and I'm going to say that for the time being, its name is Acme Corp. And then I'm going to insert that account, and then I'm going to query to say, hey, get me the name of that account now that it's hit the database. Does the name equal foo, or does the name equal bar? When you have multiple triggers on a given S object, there's no way for you to know. You just simply cannot know. There's no guarantee that one of these will execute before the other one. So there are quite a few cons to this approach, right? You don't have control over the order of execution. You're not adhering to best practices. Instantly, this becomes unmaintainable. And if you work in teams, then all of those problems are compounded. So if you go into your Salesforce org and you see logic within the trigger itself, right? That's what this level 1 is. You know, you might expect to see this from somebody who's maybe a new college graduate, fresh on the platform. If you're in an org and you've got an admin and they're doing their best, they came up with a situation that Process Builder or Flow couldn't handle. Or if somebody's just a lone wolf developer, they've always done it. They're the only person, we need something done in Salesforce. We'll just go talk to Greg, and Greg just takes care of it. Those are kind of the scenarios where you might expect to see triggers written like this. You do not expect to see this written from any reputable consulting partner, right? Or anybody who claims to be a senior developer, right? So if you go into your org and you see logic within the trigger body themselves, first of all, I'm going to encourage you to listen to the rest of this presentation so that way you understand some next steps that you can move out of level 1 and maybe into level 2. If you have a consulting partner, reconsider your engagement with them, because that is not the kind of quality that you're paying top dollar for, right? And if you are that lone wolf Salesforce person, or if you're an admin or you're new to the platform, go on Trailhead. There's plenty of resources that can help you skill up beyond this first level of writing Apex triggers. After level 1, we get to level 2, right? A repeatable pattern. So you might find this in a lot of different Salesforce orgs where, okay, they don't have the logic in the trigger. But what they do is they create a trigger called, in this case, on a contact object, and then they check the trigger context. So if we're before an insert, then I'm going to call the contact trigger handler dot before insert method. So they'll take the logic away from the trigger and put it into the contact trigger handler itself. And then they just have these if-else statements that'll check the context and call the appropriate logic. So this is a big, big, big step up from level 1, right? There's no more logic in the trigger. We're just actually checking the trigger context and calling the appropriate logic. All of the logic actually resides within the contact trigger handler. So contact trigger handler might look something like this, right? Before insert, you're going to give me the new list of contacts. For every contact in that list, I'm going to say their first name is Bugs and their last name is Bunny, right? You might also then have some logic that needs to happen after insert. So you'd write another method called after insert where you pass it in the new list and the new map, right? So this is, like I said, a very big step up from level 1. And to be honest with you, this is probably one of the most common things you'll see in the Salesforce ecosystem. Triggers written at level 2, where they just pass everything to the trigger handler and let it take care of everything. So this is good because you do only have the one trigger per S object. You have controlled order of execution because you have that single injection point. But this leaves a little bit to be desired because, you know, if I do this on the contact object, I'm going to have to do something very similar on the account object when I write an account trigger. And I'm going to have to do something very similar on opportunity when I need to write an opportunity trigger. So one thing that's kind of a little bit less than optimal if you're writing triggers at level 2 is that it requires frequent code modification. And there's a lot of repeated code too. And then if you are working in a complex org where they have, you know, maybe a very, very mature or very complicated service cloud implementation, for example, your case trigger handler might become super, super large. So that one place to keep all of your code might become one huge place to really, you know, get a headache when you're trying to read it. And then there's also one thing that's about this, this level 2 that I don't hear discussed too frequently is that there's unclear programming specifications between the trigger and the handler, right? So in this case, right, if I wrote after insert to say, okay, give me the new list and then the new map on contact trigger, I could say, give me new map and then new list on account trigger. So there's not a consistent order in which your variables are passed to the method calls themselves. So it's, you know, it's a little nitpicky, but it still is less than ideal because it's just one more opportunity for somebody to be inconsistent with your code base, right? So if you go into your setup menu and you open up Developer Console and you see triggers that are written like this, right? You should expect to see this if you're in an average Salesforce implementation. This is a very average way of doing things. By average, I mean like very common, consistent. A lot of Salesforce teams do it this way. And if you have developers who all work together, odds are they're probably doing something like this, and they just kind of have a community understanding of this is the way that we do it, right? If you see this, you should, if you see this in your Salesforce org and you're in the nonprofit space and you're using NPSP, this is probably not the right way to write triggers. NPSP is very unique, and they have what's called a table-driven trigger management framework. TDTM. You can learn about it as you study for your nonprofit consultant exam. But and we won't go too much into that, but the point is that you shouldn't be using this with NPSP. Go to the Power of Us hub and learn how to use the TDTM the right way. Also, if you are an architect, right, like there are better ways to do this. So you should probably try to level up just a little bit instead of just sticking to this basic pattern. Again, if you find yourself in this org, listen to the rest of this presentation. We've got some cool stuff coming for level 3. Again, grow your skills on Trailhead. Level 2 is a good place to be. Level 2 takes care of a lot of problems that we see in level 1. Level 2 is pretty common. So, you know, you're doing some things right if your org is on level 2. But now we're going to take a look at level 3, the industry standard. Okay. Now, this is a formal trigger framework itself, and it's written by a person named Kevin O'Hara. And I'm not going to go into too much of the details of the implementation, but the way that this works is if you use Kevin's code, he provides to you this class called a trigger handler, which takes care of almost everything that is common across triggers. So your implementation becomes an override of one of these methods that are included in the trigger handler. What does that mean? We don't need to worry about this trigger handler too much. What it means is that your triggers become one-liners. Opportunity to trigger handler dot run. That's it. That's the entire scope of the body of the trigger. And to create your trigger handler, you just say opportunity trigger handler in this case extends the trigger handler. So that means that it gets all of the stuff that's defined in the trigger handler for free. And you just need to override whatever context specific method you need. So you can, in this case, we're overriding before insert. So before insert, we're taking all of the opportunities that are in trigger.new and we're setting their name to huge deal. Okay. Level 3, I'm not, like I said, I'm not going to go too much into the details of the trigger handler itself. If you take a look at it, it's kind of complicated. right? There's a lot of stuff that's actually being done here. So I would definitely recommend the name of the developer who authored this is Kevin O'Hara. And you could just Google search Kevin O'Hara trigger framework. And if you listen to a lot of the developer evangelists at Salesforce, a lot of times they're going to be using this in a lot of their code examples. So this might become more familiar to you if you attend Trailhead DX or if you go to Dreamforce. They probably will be using this trigger framework. So there are some pros and cons about level 3, right? Level 3, there is still, we only have one trigger per S object, way more maintainable and far less repeated code. There are a few cons though, right? Let's just say, for example, we had a large organization and we had multiple teams, or let's just say we had 2 teams. We had a wholesale team and a wholesale and then a retail team. And we had, you know, the wholesale opportunities had their own record type and the retail opportunities had their own record type. Both of the logic for the wholesale team and the logic for the retail team must reside in that opportunity trigger handler to maintain the one trigger per S object rule that we talked about earlier. So as you mature, right, the body of this before insert method is going to get longer and longer and longer, right? Like I said, the trigger handler class itself gets very large. So sometimes it requires a lot of teamwork and a lot of coordination to make sure that you're not stepping on each other's toes, you're not overriding each other's work. Working in source control is very important. And then one other thing that I personally don't like is downcasting. Now, we don't need to get into it too much here, but when you use this framework, if you take a look right here, this trigger.new is actually a list of S objects. So we need to tell the framework, hey, I know that these are S objects and I know that they're opportunities. So we cast that to a list of opportunities. I'm not too particularly fond of that, but in general, this is the gold standard for Salesforce implementations and trigger handlers to be written in the ecosystem, right? So if you log into your Salesforce org, and you see this, you know that you have an advanced Salesforce implementation, right? You do not expect to see this from a junior level developer. If somebody authors something like this and they have the title of junior developer, please give them a promotion, because if you don't promote them, somebody else is going to come in and scoop them up, okay? And if you do write a trigger like this, or if you're in an org that's like this, you should be proud, but you should always look to continue to improve. And that's where coming to things like developer user group meetings, Salesforce Saturday, you know, more formal things like Dream in Texas or, you know, Trailhead DX, we together can make this better and get past level 3. So before we get into the next level, I'm going to jump over. I've got a scratch org here, and I've got actually the code for all of these levels within Visual Studio Code. So I'm kind of curious if anybody has any questions that they want answered or wants to see an implementation of one of these trigger handlers at a different level. We can code it together live, and then we'll talk about what comes next after level 3. So I know that we had asked for, you know, when do you use like old map versus new map, right? So we can go over that example. Are there any other examples that folks want to see about how logic might be written in a trigger that is at level 1, 2, or 3?
Hi, Renee again. Yeah, level 3. I think I followed through 1 and 2, but got a little confused with level 3.
Yeah, level 3 is tough. Level 3 is definitely advanced. So here we are in level 3. Go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Hi, sorry, Mitch. This is Armand.
Yep.
I have questions. I don't know if you're doing the next presentation in February, right?
Correct.
Is that the more advanced version of this, or something
yeah,
else?
so the downcomings or the shortcomings of level 3 will be addressed in the presentation on level 4.
Okay. So maybe then I'll ask about, because I was curious if you use Trigger Factory, and also how do you prevent recursion triggers?
Yeah, that's a good point. So we will discuss that, right? So level 4 is the new hotness, right?
Okay.
But you got to join us in February to discuss some of that stuff. But yeah, trigger recursion prevention. I think that's a good point. To be honest with you, I probably should have baked a little bit more of that into this presentation, because it can be possible. Let's just say after update of opportunity, I want to update the opportunity again, which would then mean another after update, which would update the opportunity, another after update. So it's important to make sure that you don't recursively define your triggers, right? So I'm gonna show a live demonstration of how you prevent that in level 3, right? So
Excuse me.
go ahead.
Can I just ask a general question about the framework? You install this framework. How is it maintained? Like, what if something in the platform changes or new objects are introduced? How do you maintain that framework?
So the framework itself has honestly stayed pretty static since like 2013. There are one thing that has changed is the trigger context. This now just has before insert, before update. If you take a look in our old way of doing it, you'd have to explicitly say, let me see here, where's the contact trigger handler? Trigger dot is before and trigger dot is insert. So there, to be honest with you, the way that this framework is written has stayed pretty static since it's been authored, and multiple releases have came out. And this is written to be generic enough where what this does is it just determines which context you're in and calls the right method for you. And that stuff is going to stay the same in the future as it has in the past. So
it's object agnostic essentially, and then
Yes.
that's why you have to define what object the list is.
Exactly. It's
Okay.
object agnostic.
Hey, Mitch, this is Kumar. I just have one general question on best practices, so you mentioned one trigger per object, what is the best practice, can we mix the declarative and custom both together, like process builder and a trigger on an object, is that a best practice, or we should avoid these kind of scenarios because of order of execution?
So that's a great point. So in general, you want to have one automation tool per S object. You don't want to have on opportunity, you don't want to have workflow rules and process builder and flows and triggers. You want to come up with a strategy that's for you and your team to decide. Triggers are the most powerful, right? But with that power, it requires some skill to wield that power as well. So you can hurt yourself if you're not careful about what you're doing. So if in general, if you are having low volume of records, right, then the declarative things are going to work out better for you. If you have large data volumes and you're processing, let's just say you have a nightly ETL batch, which updates millions of records in your system, right? Process builder is probably going to choke, probably not going to work. So a trigger might be your best bet for synchronous record processing. And then eventually, if you get large enough, then you really just want to do everything in batches and just avoid your synchronous processing altogether. But
so, meaning if you have both of it, in a single object, then is it advisable, to move the process builder logic inside a trigger,
Yes. So determine with your team what makes most sense given your implementation, but it would be wise to migrate either the process builder logic into Apex or the Apex logic into process builder. I, as a developer, will never recommend taking your Apex and putting it into process builder, but for your team, that might make sense. I'm just biased. I'm old. I'm set in my ways. So
thank you for that, Mitch. Yeah, I was curious about this.
Sorry.
Mitch, if I can just insert on a comment on that last question. I have a consulting client, and they are using flows extensively for when they process their account records. And there are big imports of them, which clearly the process builder and flows are bad for. because they just can't handle bulk. But they really do need the sort of the declarative access to make the changes, and they need that flexibility. But I also have written a lot of triggers on, an extensive trigger on account. So we use on those records, there is a box that is, just a Boolean that says skip automation, and there's one that says skip trigger. And so anytime they do an import, they import those records and they default select all of them to skip automation, and then the trigger runs on it. Or if they have something that they want the trigger to do automatically, some of those operations, they'll have, skip automation, and it'll run the trigger. So they've, you can kind of use little flags like that to indicate which you want running.
That's
Good to
a
know.
good
Thank you,
call.
Pat. Yeah.
And Pat, one kind of little wrench that I might throw in your plan there is that there's been an incredible amount of investment in Flow from a platform perspective, and the performance of Flow far exceeds the performance of Process Builder, and Flows are now almost at a performance and speed level almost on par with Apex triggers. Not quite, but and another thing to think about is you can have your trigger be the main launching point of your flow. So you can retain that single injection point, and then you can have all of your logic. You can follow all of your logic from the trigger handler itself, and then everything that's downstream can be plugged in. If you have a particular business flow that you'd like to launch, you can do it from the trigger itself.
Yeah, that's a great point. And the investment, I'm watching flows become more and more capable to the point where I expect in a release or two, they'll be able to handle bulk. I'm looking forward to that. And I think they know that, the only way around not doing triggers is to have flows handle bulk.
Yep. Yeah. There are, to be honest with you, if you're in a brand new implementation and you're not processing hundreds of thousands of records, right now you kind of have a tough argument to make as to why you would choose a trigger as opposed to flow. One reason that is clear though is undelete, right? So whenever a record is restored, if you want to like pre-populate the name, say like restored Acme Corporation as the account name, that's not possible with the flow. Or if you had if you have like a lookup and you want to do a roll-up summary to that lookup, it's actually not possible with the flow because you cannot cover that scenario where a record gets undeleted. So you can have it work almost the right way, but not 100%. So I'm going to just code real quickly here. I want to show you how to use this level 3 trigger handler, right? To implement new functionality. And maybe highlight the old versus new, right? So I'm in the opportunity trigger handler itself, and I'm going to say public void, right? Public override void. Let's just say after update, right? Now, let's just say we had some logic where if the name changed, we want to change the stage, right? So what we're going to say is for every opportunity that is in for all of our new opportunities, right? And we need to cast this to a list of opportunity, right? For all of our new opportunities, this is where, list, right? What we would say is the old opportunity is the old map.get of the new opportunity. So trigger.oldmap .get my ops ID. Right now, this is giving me an S object. I need to cast it to an opportunity. So this is what we mean when we say comparing the old versus the new. So I'm using the old map on the ID of the opportunity to determine what was the older version of this opportunity. So now I can say if the opportunity's name has changed, right? So if my op dot name is not equal to old op dot name, right? Then I need to do something. So this right here is where we perform that check. This is how we know that the name changed, because we're getting the name from the old definition of the opportunity itself. And let's just say we had a list of opportunities. Okay, so if the name changed, then I need to update the opportunity, right? So let's just say my op dot stage name equals, I don't know, prospecting. Right, and then we'll say we're going to update. We're going to add the opportunity to the ones that we need to update. Then update the ones that we need to update. So this is an example of a few things here, right? So we're using the existing trigger framework to implement new functionality within the after update context of the trigger on opportunity, right? What we're doing is we're saying, okay, for all of the new records that I have, fetch me the old version of that record and then compare the names. If the name changed, let's set the stage back to prospecting, and then we're going to update that record again. Now, this is an example. This is an example of something that probably should be done before update, because we're updating the exact same record that induced the trigger itself. But if we just wrote this as is, right, it's possible that then we could recursively have this update to the same opportunity flow through and then re-trigger itself again. So a lot of times what we do for recursion prevention is what we do is we create a static set of IDs. So these are the IDs that have been processed before, or let's just say after update. So what we do here is we say if the old map, so we say if the name has changed and, let me see here, and we have not yet processed this ID, so if the ID's process update after update does not contain the ID that we want, then we'll do this. But we're always going to add the ones that we've updated to this list. So this is how we prevent that recursion from happening. In this case, we're not updating the name again, so it wouldn't actually recurse. But this is just one little implementation of how you can take the existing trigger framework, and all you need to do is just override the context method and then fill out your logic within that method itself, using the old map to do the comparison between what changed, to figure out what changed, and then using a static set of IDs to prevent recursion. So if we want to, we can push this up to Salesforce and see how it works. I might need to do this. Okay, let's push this up to Salesforce and see if it works. Oh, what's going on here? Variable is not visible. All right. So let's take a look at level 1, right? So our level 1 triggers, what we're doing is we're setting the name of the account to either foo or bar, and we don't really know what's going to happen. So let's create a new account. We'll call it Acme Corporation. Now, when I save, before it hits the database, we're going to reset the name to either foo or bar. But because we wrote the logic within the triggers, we don't know which one's actually going to happen. Looks like foo is the winner this time, right? So that will work in order to actually get the record update that you want, but it's really not advised. I think that contact trigger handler was the next one. Contact trigger handler. So what are we doing in contact trigger handler? I believe we're setting all of the names to Bugs Bunny. So contacts, let's create a new contact. Let's say it's Luke Skywalker, right? But when I insert it, before it hits the database, we're going to override Luke and Skywalker with Bugs and Bunny. There we go. So each one of these triggers will work. It's just some of them have more advantages as opposed to others. So now let's take a look at our opportunities. We'll create a new one that's, some dollar amount, closes at some date, and let's set it to needs analysis. This is my big deal, right? Now, the way that we wrote this opportunity trigger, before insert, it's going to set the name to huge deal, okay? So now it's a huge deal. If I edit it and change the name, then it's going to pick up on the logic that says, okay, set it back to prospecting. So if I say huge deal 1, 2, 3, I'll save it. Well, record is read only. Interesting. So we're just changing this one now to before.
Yeah, it's because you're changing the myop.stage name.
Yep. Instead of creating
in the reference, yeah. Instead of deep cloning or creating a new object.
So I'll edit it. Now it was set back to prospecting. So all of these mechanisms can work in order to get the logic that you want into your Salesforce board. So to a naive customer, they'll see that, hey, the name was set appropriately. Yeah, this looks great. Let's build some new stuff, right? But it's your job as a Salesforce expert and engineer to know the differences between these levels and know what's good about them and what's bad about them. And hopefully you can now, hopefully now you're a little bit more well-armed to have a discussion, in favor of or in opposition to a proposed trigger implementation and trigger framework. So that is my presentation. I'm very happy to answer any questions or go through some more live demos if we want to. We got all this all set up right here, but let me know what you think.
Great job.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was excellent. Thank you. And then the recursion that he showed is actually, if you do find yourself in an org that has configuration and triggers, that recursion checking will be your absolute best friend.
Yeah, I want to put in that I've generally worked at small companies with not like the huge developer teams, but yet we do have developers usually, and then we have admins, and I've never not seen tons of declarative with tons of code, basically. Like it's always like that. So I think this, you know, that we touched on this a little bit earlier, but it's a really important discussion to keep having more of, you know, how to manage that, because you're going to have admins and they're going to do, you know, declarative tool. They're going to use declarative. I don't know if we're going to, I'm sure there's some companies, like how often have you ever seen a place that just completely is like just code? We don't use any declarative automation. Like, is that?
It's not really the value proposition of Salesforce, right?
Right.
It's no software, right? They always tell you that you don't need to be a full-blown engineer in order to do this stuff. I personally have been in a few orgs where we don't touch anything declaratively, but that's probably just because, like I said, we're set in our ways and we just have some old habits and they die hard. But you know, it's important to know, like for example, we were talking about it earlier, flows have had a whole bunch of investment in them. Like if I was starting brand new from scratch, I probably would never ever recommend touching a process builder. I probably would only recommend going with flows. And flows will set you up to take that next level from administrator and like get you into that intermediate level between administrator and developer, because flows are just visual programming. So the act of writing flows sets you up to become a developer in the future, better than anything I've ever seen, better than any kind of Udemy course or any YouTube video, or even, you know, even a computer college science class, right? If this is what you do every day, you work in Salesforce, there's nothing that you can do that will set you up to become a better developer in the future or gain those skills than invest in learning how to do flows and how to do flows well. So.
Agreed. The big disadvantage that they had for a long time was they couldn't be record triggered, and now they can. You know, you had to for this client that I mentioned before, they use processes and flows. Basically, they have these extensive processes that do all of the criteria checking, and then call flows to do the actual logic, to create related records, to do whatever. And I've used a similar framework for my triggers that is somewhere between your level 2 and level 3. And that is, I use my trigger handler as like that sort of line of blue diamonds in a process builder. It just goes through that list and sorts them out and puts it, if it needs this, it goes in this list. If it needs that, it goes in that list or that map, or that list of maps. And then I pass those off. I factor out the actual logic to other classes that create related records or make call outs or whatever needs to be done.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and keeping that that logic really nice and tight and clean and precise is applicable in a process builder. It's applicable in a trigger handler. It's also applicable if you're writing flows, right? Because you should have just that strip of blue diamonds where you're checking, you know, what changed during this transaction, and out of the subset of records that are part of this transaction, which ones are eligible for certain actions to be taken.
Right, and then call your subflows. Yeah, so the structure that you can do with factoring out, you know, factoring out a big flow into sort of a criteria, I think of it as a triage handler, right? It goes through and checks to see what needs to be done, and then it calls subflows to do all of that. You can do that's not a bad analogy to a good trigger framework.
Yep.
This is Rowan. I have kind of a couple comments about it. One of them is, I think one of the concerns I have is I think flows are awesome, but I think it's going to leave some admins behind. I think it's really hard to transition to a programming mindset. And so that's just something I'm just thinking about the future. There's no like disclaimer here. Also, I think flows are still really difficult to document. So I think, you know, as you start getting into complicated flows, it's really hard to figure out what they're actually doing, especially if you get into a bunch of subflows, and that's going to create a lot of pain. And I also think in general, we have to like take what Salesforce recommends with a grain of salt. I knew right from the beginning that they were wrong recommending a single process a framework. It was just a ridiculous thing. And I wish they had I know that's why they're putting so much energy behind flows now, is that they just really blew it recommending the process builder because of its CPU inefficiencies. And the last thing, I just was kind of curious if you guys are hearing any place in the ecosystem recommendations for best practices for partners with managed packages to start writing their triggers using custom metadata so they can be transitioned into invocable classes so that you can still maintain that one trigger framework and invoke managed package triggers instead of having to have multiple triggers on the same object when you're installing packages. I was wondering if anybody's heard about that as a new best practice.
Yeah, I think, Rohan, we are using that, we are controlling our trigger, even though we are not using the managed package, but we are controlling our trigger, with the metadata actually. So, and it's easy, for admins to switch it off, in production, and it takes effect. So I think, we didn't cover it here, but one thing, which we are doing, we are controlling all our trigger, using custom metadata. And then we take a control, and if we don't need that trigger to run, that can be switched off from prod itself, by just setting.
Yeah, that's a
Did
very
Mitch
good
pay?
point.
Did Mitch pay you to set him up for next month? It sounds like exactly what we're going to talk about next month. Is that right, Mitch?
Yep, that's exactly right. So we're going to be talking about right now in level 3, right? In the level 3 trigger itself. Basically, like I had said before, if you have multiple teams where you have a lot of logic on a given object, the scope of what happens within, say, this before update block of this method just grows and grows and grows and grows, right? And it becomes harder and harder to maintain. So what we're going to be talking about next month is ways to take basically all of the actions that need to happen before update and write them in a way such that they're controlled. You dynamically figure out which ones you're going to take based on custom metadata records that you have stored in your org. And you can also do things like bypass the execution, turn them off, things like that, like we had kind of alluded to earlier. And Pat, I believe you had said something about using a checkbox to bypass automation and then a checkbox to bypass triggers on your account object. One thing that might be helpful, I've had a lot of success using custom permissions to be the bypass, right? So you could have like a custom permission called bypass account automation or whatever. And then you can just assign that permission to either an individual through a permission set assignment or to a group of people through a profile. And then you can say, you know, for example, my nightly integration user doesn't execute any logic, but you don't need to actually specify that at the record level. You specify that as the running user level. So
yep, that's a great idea.
I think, I mean, similarly, I've always just used custom settings,
mhm.
right? Like in the trigger itself, at the, you know, to say if that was when I started, the developers that came before me didn't use that. I'm an admin developer. I'm your worst nightmare. As far as dangerous when it comes to doing anything in code, but just like you said earlier, it's like when you're a solo admin, sometimes you have to do what you have to do. And I'm a problem solver. So, but when I found out later on about that idea of just having a custom setting where, you know, you can turn off on and off, you know, triggers without having to literally like go into code and, you know, find out how to deprecate it and turn it off. I was like, oh my God, that's the best thing I've ever heard of. So yeah, I think putting in place those things where you can turn off a trigger from declaratively in production is really important for most orgs, because not even if you're a developer, like the time it takes to get and actually move stuff over from code to turn it off, it's silly, right?
Yeah. And you need to do the actual deployment. So that means you need to run your test classes again. It's just not ideal to if you ever need a situation where you need to turn off a trigger or bypass for an individual user. So it's always good to build both of those in, right? Like the bypass via custom permission is really nice. And then the actual global turn this off until I turn it back on via custom setting. Those are two very nice things to have in your arsenal of tools for building triggers.
Yeah, one of the things that I put into my trigger handlers, where I'm using that trigger handler to sort through that list or map and to put those into sub lists or sub maps that I can send off to other handlers. When I do that, I always put a system debug statement in that says sending 47 records to this. And so when a batch runs, I can just look at the log of that and see, okay, out of that batch of 400 records, 37 of them needed logo and then they went off to get a logo request. 48 of them needed research and they went off to this way. So I can know what's going on.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's always tough trying to track all of your logic in your Salesforce environment, right?
Yeah.
So if you have a trigger and that's your only thing that you do on that object, it's actually a lot easier than working with a whole bunch of different what would otherwise be simpler tools like the administrative point and click tools. There's maybe some speed to implementation gains by using those tools, but there's also slower troubleshooting and maintenance when it comes to figuring out like what is the actual root cause of an error. When you get that text or that email at 2 a.m., something's broken, you're the one who's got to fix it, right? Having this single source and a well-architected trigger to say, oh, these are the actions that we're taking in this order on this object really can save you that quick speed to resolution time. So that's definitely something that I don't feel like is talked about enough. When folks say, oh, I can build it in Process Builder in half a day, I might as well just do it. So there's two parts to that coin, two sides of that coin.
Yeah. Who else thinks that we need system debug statements in flows? I'd love to get them.
I do.
But because the error email that you get is just a train wreck.
Yeah,
Train wreck is an understatement.
They're putting in a lot of new stuff about debugging flows. I believe I just took my maintenance exam, and I believe now you can debug a flow as another user. So if you have a specific user who's having trouble with the flow, you can mock up the data and then run it as that user and see what that user is going to see. So they're making heavy investments in flow. I'm really excited to see what the future holds for flow. But a trigger is a Swiss Army knife, right? It can do anything that you want, but you can also cut yourself. So it's powerful, but until flows get a little bit more mature, some of this new stuff, it's also brand new, right? I mean, any new Salesforce product takes a little bit of time to mature. I don't know if anybody remembers when Lightning Experience was launched, but let's just say that new product rollout was not as seamless as they might have hoped.
Hey, Mitch, do you have any tips for avoiding Apex timeouts for when a trigger is running on a bulk import?
That's a good question. So in general, right, like I think we kind of touched on this a little bit. Eventually, if you have large enough data volumes, right, and let's just say you're using the bulk API, thousands or tens of thousands or maybe even hundreds of thousands of records, eventually you're going to get to that point where all of your automation must happen on every single one of those records. So if you're using Process Builder, those CPU, that CPU time that it takes to spin up the Process Builder is all going to get eaten up, and that's going to eat away into your transaction timeout limit. So a couple of things that we can do, right? Number one is avoid synchronous processing of records in the first place. Don't write a trigger, write a batch class. Right, you can create flows that are scheduled and batchable too. So that's one thing I would do. If you're talking to your customers and they say, hey, when this changes, I need this other field on this related object to get updated, ask them, is it okay if there's a 15-minute delay in that update? Right. So at the very beginning of the design, that might be a valid question to ask. If you already have existing logic, right, migrate everything into Apex if you can. If there is Apex, migrate it all into Apex. Get rid of the process builders because they're just going to eat up your CPU time. And another thing that you can do is use the @future or queuable as a little bit of tools to defer some of that processing, so that way you have longer timeout periods and you can just do that processing when the system has time itself. Got to be careful with those. Those have their own set of limitations and cautions and worries, but read up on them. They might be able to help you resolve some timeout issues for synchronous record processing.
Great, thanks.
We have someone who's been raising their hand virtually a few times. Would you speak up for me?
Hey, sorry guys, I didn't know the protocol. I thought maybe if I had a question, I would just raise my hand.
Yeah, no.
Okay, so
yeah, go ahead.
okay, so I saw this set of static IDs that was being used to prevent the recursion. I just had a question. If this kind of set should be maintained per event, or like we can have, let's say, just one set for update rather than update or before update, like which one is the recommended practice? Because I think this is pretty useful, and this gives me a nice idea to prevent recursion in my own project.
Yeah, so if you think about it, like by definition, an insert cannot really be recursive. You can't like insert the same record multiple times. You're actually inserting multiple different records. So we don't need to worry about it on insert context. Delete, once it gets deleted, it's deleted, right? The technical term is delete is an idempotent operation. So we don't need to worry about it on delete. But we really do need to worry about it on update, especially if we have something else which could trigger that same record update. So I personally just like to keep a set of IDs that I've processed after update and a set of IDs that I've processed before update. And then you just use those in the corresponding context to filter out those ones that you've already seen or that have already made it through the framework at least once. So if the set of IDs that have been processed before update does not contain your record ID, then you know it's the first time that this has gone through the trigger framework itself.
Hey, Mitch, quick question on
Thank
that
you.
context. And this is going to be a little sort of navel gazing here from a trigger standpoint. If you do a change after insert to that same record, is that considered an update that will trigger? It does. Okay.
Yep. So if you had, like, for example, sometimes, sometimes you have to wait until after your insert is done and then update something. Like, for example, case, right? If you need the case number, let's just say you had case description and you had a requirement that you're supposed to have a standard case description where it's supposed to be case number dash the person who owned it dash the subject, whatever it may be, right? That case number is not available to you until the insert operation is complete. So then if you want to do that, you want to format the description that way, you need to do then another update after your after insert. So technically it's one insert and then immediately followed by an update to the same record.
Okay. So if you change a record itself in an after insert, then you can count on the before update and after update to also run.
Yes. Yeah. So if you change, if you change a record after insert, you won't do anything. So let's try that right here. So if this was after insert, so, right, I'm just going to go like this. I'm going to comment this out. After insert, instead of before insert setting the name to huge deal, after insert, we're going to set the name to huge deal. What'll happen is, I believe we'll get that same runtime error saying that this opportunity is read only, because you cannot mutate the record that has already been to the database. Instead, what we would need to do is list of new opportunity. These would be the ops to update.
Take its ID, create a new opportunity with that ID and update it. Got it.
Got it. Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
So ops to update dot add a new opportunity where the ID is op ID and the name is huge deal.
Got it.
So this is awesome. I love how much just like discussion that's somewhat theoretical that we're having. But also we need to stop for a second because we have a few things to do before people have to leave, and then we can talk some more for whoever has time to keep talking. But before, let me just say thank you so much for that presentation, Mitch. I think, we got a lot out of it. So yes, thank you very much.
Well, you're very welcome.
Everyone else is muted, so you know.
Yeah, woohoo, yeah.
Yay!
No, your presentation was awesome, Mitch.
Yeah.
Can't wait for February's.
Roaring applause.
I feel like we could have a few hours on, just like I can't think of the term for it, but like a salon where we're just all sitting and chatting about these concepts, and feel it's very cool. But I know that some people have to get going soon, so I want to do two things, which is and I'm gonna not put up the final slide. I'm just gonna let us all see each other. So first we have a question. Is anyone hiring or anyone looking for a job? And I'm just gonna say whatever one you're doing, just we'll take turns and go through. Before to start us off, someone had to leave early, but Armand Shah works for Capital One, and he told me that they are hiring. He did not tell me the actual name of the position, but he's going to try to post it in the community, the actual position. But if you're looking, it's probably a developer position, I would imagine, that they have. So they have offices in Austin, and they have their offices other places as well. So, but from there, who else? I guess like who's looking for a job? Let's start there.
I'm looking for a job.
Awesome. And you're looking to possibly move to Austin if you find one down here, or remote, I imagine.
Yep, exactly. That's kind of the next steps. Just applying, using LinkedIn to network, and then looking for a junior developer position. Would be open to anything admin related as well, if there's some sort of avenue into getting more developer centric later down the road. But yeah.
Awesome, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and you could also post in our community if you want. I think Nadina, I know our chat has gotten quite large, but she did link to the Austin developer community in the success community, not the same as where you sign up for this, but there's a success community we have, and you can post in there as well. And
okay. Yeah, I'll look at that right now. You said it's in the chat.
I just reposted it.
You reposted it, thank you. She's
great.
All right. Anyone else looking? And I'll go to anyone hiring. I'll start. Besides Capital One, my company is hiring. I don't know. Yeah, so it's now a Salesforce business analyst role, and you'd be working directly with me. And so I work at a company called Easy Texting here in Austin, but it's actually not anywhere. It's completely remote. We're not going back to the office. There's a lot of great perks and benefits, and we have a lot going on. So if you want to be busy and learn a lot of different things, go to my, just do the website for easytexting.com. You'll find, oh, actually, you should send it to me because I get a bonus if you do. So sorry.
And somebody asked in the chat about what the requirements are for that position.
We're looking for someone with some amount of experience, a couple of years with Salesforce experience, honestly. Like we can't take a newbie right now just because. That's my dog. There was a car who shut their door outside, so we have to protect them from that. So I have 3 dogs. Anyway, look on the website. I don't want to take up all of our time, like giving you the job description, but it's really just doing everything. It's if you have any Salesforce background, if you have background doing like things with like integrations, like we use SalesLoft for sales enablement, we use TalkDesk, we use Drift, we use everything in the world. We're using Service Cloud, we're using Sales Cloud, we're using Communities, we're using Pardot. So, the more experience you have, the better in doing anything and everything. That's what we're looking for. Okay, anybody else who is hiring?
I did just share a link right now. There is an open position for an application engineering manager on the Salesforce platform within Google here in Austin. So definitely take a look. if you have any questions or would like an internal recommendation, please, shoot me a message on LinkedIn or Twitter and we can discuss. Yeah, it won't be for my team, but it's another Salesforce position here within Google in Austin as well. And I know that Austin is a very large growth center for Google itself, and Google is rapidly expanding their Salesforce full-time employee presence as opposed to just hiring in contractors. So there can be some opportunities in the future if somebody would like to join Google. So take a look at that listing. I shared it in the chat. And yeah.
I'd like to share that my employer is looking for somebody with automated test experience. So we're creating a position for a test engineer, and really would just like to be able to get some automations going on in all the development we do. We've got 4 developers on the team, 3 business analysts, 2 admins, and we just feel like that would round the team out pretty well. So if anybody wants more information on that, if they have a background in automated testing, especially crossing over into the Salesforce world, I'll get Melissa some information on how to contact me about that.
Yeah.
My company. Oh.
You can post also to the community. I think you should have ability to do that, but you can always send something to me and I can post it if you need to.
Thank you.
Happy?
I was gonna say, my company's hiring as well. Fast Slow Motion, we work with small and medium-sized businesses. We're a consultancy, so we're across lots of different verticals. More admin focused, so if you have admin skills, that's great, but we also are looking to hire some people that are in the developer realm. So if you can cross those boundaries, so we don't have to be outsourcing everything. When it comes to developing, we are hiring, so I can put it in the chat. You can hit me up on LinkedIn because I also get a bonus if you come on. So
I'll put my LinkedIn.
Lots of different roles. We're hiring and moving very, very fast.
Awesome. Yeah, I don't know about everyone else, but I've heard that with this pandemic that the Salesforce, need has just exploded even more than ever. Now, of course, for developers more than anything, always, but even, for admins and business analysts as well, it's really picked back up. So anybody else hiring? If not, we will. I'll give you a second.
No, one thing, this isn't a hiring thing, but Dan, I just wanted to give you a little note here, and I don't know if anybody else has the same experience in the Salesforce ecosystem, but finding qualified automation engineers to build your end-to-end tests on Salesforce platform, it's incredibly difficult. So if you can find somebody, maybe that might be a topic for discussion for someday, but that is, you're going to be looking for a needle in a haystack to find that individual. And if you do, you should hold on to them tightly because they're hard to find. It's very difficult to build, using Selenium or any kind of other open source framework for building your end-to-end test scripts. It's got a fair share of challenges working with Salesforce. So maybe that's a topic for a future discussion about how we can take our engineering to the next level and automate our regression tests, automate our deployments. I'm already talking at the next talk, so maybe in a few months.
we've got some devs that have built some stuff in Selenium, but we have a budget now to buy a tool, and we're holding on to that until we have someone in to get their opinion on what tool is best to pay for. But yeah, not that I'm saying we would say no to somebody with Selenium experience. I mean, if you can figure that thing out, then you're at the level of thinking we need here. But yeah, thanks.
Okay, awesome. And Pat put into the chat about Super Badge Saturday, which is a newer group that's come out. You can sign up. Right?
Super Badge Sunday.
Sunday, sorry, it's not Super Badge Saturday, Super Badge Sunday.
Yeah, so basically it's a 1 hour, a Sunday, it's noon Austin time. We just do a Zoom meeting, go over the challenges in a super badge. This week we're looking at the Lightning Reports and Dashboard Specialist super badge. I also give about a 15-minute intro to tips for taking on super badges, because a lot of people get very frustrated with them. So we'd love to have you join. There's a link there in the chat if you want to sign up for it.
Awesome. All right. Okay. So drum roll, please. I'm not going to do the sound. Okay. We're going to give away our 2 certifications. Yay. All right. The first winner, I'm going to, I need an envelope to pretend I'm opening. Is Elizabeth Pembridge. Are you here, Elizabeth? Am I saying
is this the $200 voucher?
$400 voucher.
$400 voucher.
Oh, well, for one, you get 1 certification, but take a big.
I get those covered through Trailhead Military now.
Oh.
So can you redraw for a person that's not in Trailhead Military?
Thank you. We will we'll do that.
That's so sweet.
And that's my plug for Trailhead Military. If you are a veteran, active duty spouse, and you have not registered with Trailhead Military, you need to go find it and get registered.
I feel like half the people on my screen are in Trailhead Military. So
I think several years.
Yes. We have a strong Salesforce military community here in Austin. Yes, anyway, Maravis Foundation, anyone looking to get training, I know a lot of people here are probably a little more advanced, but Maravis is great. It started here in Austin, and it's great. All right, next we have Chris Lagarde. Are you in Trailhead Military, or could you use one?
I'm not in the military, or haven't been in the military, so yes, I could use it. Fantastic.
Okay. Woohoo!
Wow. Gee whiz.
Now you're gonna have to study.
Well, you're right.
I mean, I'm sure you're studying every weekend and every night anyway, but just, you know.
Well, what a thrill. There's a lot of competition here.
I know.
So I'm surprised I won, but I tell you what, over the years, it's surprising with such small groups, you tend to win more than you expect. You know, whether it be a Bluetooth speaker, you know, I had that for a while and passed it on to my son, and he says, "It finally died, Dad." I mean, that thing lasted for a while. So that's my speech, and I'm done with it.
Awesome. All right, next. We have Ryan Dempsey. Ryan, are you in the military, or could you need a certification?
I'm not in the military. I had no certifications planned, but now I'll have to.
Okay, perfect.
Mhm.
I agree. How many do you have so far?
I have 3. I got my advanced admin in October.
All right. Well,
I'm due it for
you've lasted for like a year, I think. So you know, but you're
I told myself I was gonna spend a few months learning Apex and then try for my PD1, but I'll make that the second one I do this year.
well, awesome.
Thank
Great.
y'all so much.
Yes. Thank you.
Chris and Ryan, can y'all private message me your email addresses so that we can get those to you tonight? Thank you.
Awesome. All right. Now we can actually, you know, for whoever has time, we can stay and chat longer on Apex triggers and frameworks. Or is there any other announcements people need to make, or, you know, questions for the group before we let people drop off? And whoever's going to drop off, thank you so much for coming. It was great attendance tonight. We're very excited for everyone to be here, and there's a lot of great chat, you know, participation. So that was Very cool.
Yeah, actually, I had a question about the frameworks. So I guess from like let's I guess in my particular situation, I want to obviously be able to show like projects that I undertake myself on like a GitHub repo or something like that. I'm obviously like more towards the beginning of my Salesforce journey, so I guess should I be going for implementing I guess the third level framework? I was hearing something about a fourth level framework. I guess I want to get a kind of an idea of what I should be, I guess, shooting for right now.
Yeah, so I would recommend come next month for level 4. Okay. But also, you know, you could just do a quick Google search, Kevin O'Hara Apex trigger, and it'll take you right to the GitHub link. And that will contain all of the source code for the trigger framework that's level 3 that we talked about. You'll also find it in like pretty much a lot of really, really advanced Salesforce implementations, enterprise level things. So I would recommend you use that code, but also you need to make sure to include the license. If you ever use somebody's open source code, you need to include the license and make sure you're adhering by the license, by the terms of the license. So this is one of those scenarios you know, in Africa, they're not having to build all of these huge like land telephone lines. They're just skipping that step and going right to cell phones, right? You as a new developer, you can skip all of that step and all that headache that guys like me had to deal with for many years before this stuff was all published and crisp and clean. And you can just skip right to the good stuff and focus on implementing new features to highlight your skills. So I would definitely recommend doing that. But again, whenever you're looking at open source stuff, always got to include the license. So
okay, I'll make sure I write that down. Thank you.
And a private GitHub repository is a great way to get your name out there. You can sign up for a trial of SFDX, which will give you the ability to create scratch orgs, which are tiny little privatized development environments. So that way you can work effectively in source-driven development. And if you start off your career like that, man, you're definitely saving a lot of steps. You're skipping over a lot of steps that a lot of us who have been in the game for a long time had to take. So I cannot recommend that enough.
Awesome. I think I actually made an account a little bit ago. Right now, I'm trying to, I guess, learn a little bit more about version control and just how. Because I know how to use I understand like the terminal side of things, but just more on like procedural level, how to integrate it well with Salesforce and stuff like that. I'm using something called Launchpad right now to try to teach myself a little bit, but I'm hoping that once I get that set up, then yeah, everything will be a little more organized, hopefully.
Might be a good topic for a future user group discussion, utilizing source control within Salesforce, because it's not like utilizing source control within any other development platform.
Right.
In other development platforms, you're running that code locally on your machine, right? In Salesforce, what you're doing is you're inserting records in Salesforce's database somewhere that shows up as features and functionalities. So it's completely different. I think that might be a good topic to discuss in the future.
Yeah, no, that would be awesome, because I tried to. There was a badge for it on Trailhead, but it didn't help as much as I hoped it would. Well, yeah, thank you. I appreciate it, Mitch.
Yeah, working in version control is also, having that DevOps experience of, working in Git, automating deploys, automating the running of end-to-end testing scripts. Those are the skills that are like in the hottest of hot demand right now in the Salesforce ecosystem. Salesforce DevOps is a huge buzzword. There's a lot of products out there trying to help make it simple, because like I said, it's not like any other development platform. So if you can sharpen those skills and hone those skills, you're going to be setting yourself quite a few steps ahead of other folks in the resume pile, at least.
Okay. That is great to know. Thank you, man. Okay. Now I'm excited.
Yeah, you'll also find if you move from like organization to organization, each team will do their repository or Git a little differently as well. So you'll learn it your way, and then you'll go to a team and they'll use it a little different, or they'll have a different process. But the underlying of what you learn will be kind of the same. It'll just be a different process, how they flow through, or the branching method, or patching, or whatever they do.
Okay. Gotcha. Thank you. Appreciate it, Justin.
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna get off, guys. It was a pleasure meeting all of you guys. This was awesome, and I definitely look forward to next month to learn about level 4. That'd be exciting.
Yeah, it's gonna be good.
Yeah.
Be good.
I did not know there was a level 3 or level 4. I thought that level 2, when I got to that, was, oh my God, this is the be all end.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, it does handle a lot of the issues, right? And, if you're not actively looking for problems with it, you're probably not going to find the problems with it. So level 2 works for the majority of implementations, but I think when you see level 4 next month, you're going to say, okay, so level 4 is built on top of level 3. So it's important to introduce the concept, but level 4 is far more simple than probably anything you've ever seen when it comes to writing triggers. So I'm really excited to share that.
What are your thoughts on if you see a different trigger handler for each object?
Ooh, that probably means that the org has had a different history of implementation partners or full-time employees that have done the implementation. So, in general, right, like the 3 rules, right? Bulkify, right? You need to pick a trigger framework and stick to it, right? That's one of the 3 rules. So, if that hasn't happened in the past, then it might be up to you to persuade your management that you need to invest the time to reconcile those differences. And, like we had kind of talked about before, the time you invest now is going to be returned to you when it comes time to debug or get to root cause analysis for a problem. So having that consistent trigger framework, whatever one it is, right? Having that consistent trigger framework is going to decrease your time to root cause analysis drastically.
It's funny, during your presentation, I kind of pulled up my work org and I scrolled through the triggers, and it looked like I could kind of like predict by the API version that it was created on who did the original work and whether I was about to look at a level 1 trigger or a level 2 trigger. And unfortunately, I don't think I saw a level 3 or 4 anywhere. So, and pretty much the ones that use helpers or handlers have both a helper and a handler. So it's a trigger with both a trigger helper and a trigger handler, additional classes that I'm just like,
Yeah, most of the time when you see that, you'll see that the trigger handler does the checking of old and new, the checking of the actual stuff to determine which records are eligible to have some additional future actions taken. And then those actions are defined in the helper class and then executed as such. So that's typically the pattern that you'll see. So it'll be like trigger calls the handler, calls the helper. So that's very widely used.
Okay. So, and the fact that the triggers themselves look so different is an issue as far as like,
yes,
there not being a unified or consistent framework.
Yep.
But the fact, and you're feeling like there should be only one trigger handler that everything calls. All the triggers should call the same handler, and then there might be different helpers per object.
So in what we discussed, level 2, there's one trigger and one handler per S object. So there's a contact trigger and a contact trigger handler. There's an account trigger and account trigger handler. Level 3 gives you like a lot of the stuff that's taken care of in the handler is in that trigger handler class that you extend. So you'd have the trigger handler class, which is S-object agnostic. Then you have the opportunity trigger, and then the opportunity trigger handler extends that agnostic trigger handler itself, and so that it picks up all of that stuff that's defined in the base trigger handler class. So that's a little bit, level 3 is a little bit advanced. It requires understanding of some, kind of solid object-oriented programming, topics, but that's kind of what you should expect to see. One trigger handler per S object. And then level 3 just takes a lot of the stuff that's repeated in all of those separate trigger handlers and puts it all in its own thing. And then everything else just extends past
Yeah, I'm tracking now. Thank you. I appreciate that. It kind of missed that point at some point. So anyway, I got to take off. I have deployments to do at 8. So thanks a lot.
Have fun.
Learned a lot. Thank you.
Bye.
Mitch, I have one question for you before you guys go. I unfortunately didn't get to attend the principal part of the presentation, but I do have a question related to the nonprofit cloud. I'm curious if you have any experience with that and the trigger implementation that they're doing, because it looks like they've gone through the process of setting themselves up for a level 2 configuration. I'm curious if you've seen it and if you have any opinions on the quality of the implementation there.
Yeah, so in the nonprofit world, they have a concept called table-driven trigger management, where you write a class that is your trigger handler, and then you insert data into an S object that says, hey, this is the trigger handler for this for account, or this is the trigger handler for opportunity, or whatever it may be. That is very useful. I definitely would recommend reading more on the Power of Us hub about ways to implement that. And the presentation that we're going to be going over next month is very analogous to that, but it's made in a way where instead of using records in an S object, you're using rows in a custom metadata type to do almost the same thing. So definitely would recommend the Power of Us hub to learn more about table-driven trigger management. You'll see it abbreviated as TDTM. So you'll see that all over the documentation, all over Trailhead. Read more about that. That's the prescribed way from Salesforce to do triggers within Nonprofit Success Pack or Nonprofit Starter Pack or whatever it's called these days.
Whatever the current name is, yeah. Nonprofit cloud.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that was helpful. I mean, I've gone through the study. I've gotten my certification for nonprofit, but I was curious as to really the level of quality with their implementation, because a lot of what folks out in the field are doing is, one person does one thing, one person does another thing, et cetera, et cetera. And now that they've instituted that in the model and are kind of delivering it, I don't know, it seems like it should be beneficial and it should be a plus for implementations, but I don't know. I was curious about your opinion on it.
Yeah, no, there's definitely a lot of cool stuff that comes with TDTM. So like, the ability to turn off or bypass without actually modifying code, which is something we were talking about earlier. I believe that that's available at the TDTM. Like, I believe that there's a bypass directly into it. It's nice because a lot of the stuff that's handled in the trigger handler class that we talked about for level 3, all of that is abstracted away from you, and you just write your logic. So you basically have before insert, and then that's it. So you don't need to worry about checking, is the system in before insert context, and all of that stuff is taken care of for you. So you just focus on the business logic itself. TDTM is a really cool project, a really cool product. And that's actually one of the main drivers for the project that I'll be describing next month. That's the level 4 trigger.
Excellent. I look forward to it. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, I think we're coming up on 8 o'clock, so probably about time to let people, walk their dogs and get some late dinner. Or, I mean, I already ate, but some people wait till this late. So anyway, so yeah, thanks so much for coming, everyone. I'm going to let us go, and It was great seeing y'all tonight. So
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for coming, everybody.
See you soon.
Yeah, see ya.
Thanks again, everybody.
Bye.